I don't know who let her in here, but this isn't her section." That's what he said, loudly, in front of VIP passengers, security staff, and Naomi Ellison, the only black woman in the diplomatic boarding area at Houston International Airport. No one said a word. No one stepped in. They assumed she didn't belong, that she was lost, a regular traveler who had wandered too far into a world built for power. What they didn't know was that Naomi wasn't there to board a flight. She was there to test the system. And the moment she calmly placed a matte black ID card on the check-in desk, sealed with a live chip emblem and embossed with the words International Audit Authority Class 5 Oversight, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Entire careers began to tremble. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand justice. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "You assumed. That was your mistake." But to understand why that single moment could jeopardize a $12,400,000,000 0 cents funding deal, and why everyone suddenly realized they had underestimated the wrong woman, you have to rewind 3 hours to when she first walked through those glass doors, and no one knew who she was. You're watching Justice Stories, where silence isn't weakness, and power doesn't always wear a suit. What would you have done in Naomi's place? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned. What happens next will change everything. Naomi Ellison stepped into the priority terminal at Houston International Airport like someone who had walked through these doors 100 times. And in truth, she had. Not this terminal, not this airport, but terminals like it. The kind built for the world's most important people, diplomats, CEOs, oil magnates, political elites. She moved with quiet precision, dressed in a navy suit tailored to function. No designer logos, no diamond watch. Just polished shoes, a discreet carry-on, and a passport that carried more weight than any name on the wall. Still, as she approached Gate D2, the corridor marked for diplomatic boarding, every eye seemed to tighten around her. The first to act was the gate agent, a lean man with a stiff jaw and a badge that read T-Rock. He glanced up, caught a full glimpse of Naomi, and then did something small but telling. His body language shifted. His face went from neutral to guarded, then politely dismissive. She'd seen that look before. It was the look people gave you when they were trying to figure out how someone like you had made it. "Ma'am," he said, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This gate is for diplomatic class boarding and executive clearance only. You'll need to proceed to general boarding." He gestured off to the right, toward the standard economy zone. Naomi didn't blink. She didn't argue. She simply held up her phone with the digital boarding pass glowing on screen. Level 4 diplomatic access, verified, stamped, sealed. She tilted it slightly to let him see. Rourke stared at it, not scanning it, just looking, like he was trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed. "Is this your pass?" he asked. Naomi Ellison, booked through Global Transit Oversight, Clearance ID Echo Lima 47, Audit Class Boarding. Again, he didn't scan, just nodded slowly, then said, "I'm going to have to verify this with my supervisor. Please wait over there for a moment." There was no explanation, no apology, just a flat tone and a gesture to a metal bench near the glass wall. Naomi walked over without a word. She sat, set her carry-on at her feet, and crossed her legs slowly. Through the glass, she could see the private jet bridge, a sleek corridor leading to a waiting aircraft that sparkled under the late morning sun. 2 white men in tailored suits approached the gate as she waited. One flashed a Centurion card. Rourke didn't check anything, just smiled and waved them through with ease. Naomi observed. She always observed. Her phone buzzed. A reminder. Meeting with Raymond Duval, CEO, Atlantic Sovereign Airlines, 11:45 a.m., Terminal D2, Diplomatic Conference Briefing. This wasn't just a flight. It was the final phase of a 6-week silent audit she had conducted across 17 international terminals. She had logged more than 40 hours of in-transit observation, cataloging everything from staff conduct to systemic inefficiencies. This leg, this lounge, this checkpoint wasn't the end of her journey. It was the culmination. A second man approached the gate, this one speaking rapid French into a Bluetooth earpiece. Rourke glanced at him, offered a quick welcome aboard, and opened the barrier without pause. Naomi's boarding pass still hadn't been scanned. Another 5 minutes passed, then 10. Rourke returned, now joined by a woman in a gray vest labeled Terminal Lead. They stood 10 feet away, looking at a tablet, occasionally glancing toward Naomi. She could hear bits of their conversation. Still says flagged, not on our standard diplomatic list, followed by a shrug, then a quiet laugh. Not cruel, just indifferent. That was the part that always landed deepest. Not the offense, but the casualness of it. Naomi leaned back, her face unreadable. She opened her secure audit app and logged an entry. Initial access delay. Clearance verified. Manual override blocked. Staff prioritized verbal confirmation over digital scan. Visible profile mismatch noted. Pattern consistent with systemic friction triggers. The door hissed again. A group of 4 executives entered the terminal, all of them pale, all of them loud. One of the women laughed as she called out, "Finally, a space where people actually dress for travel." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. She'd heard these coded jabs before. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer, revealing a hint of a secure ID band beneath the sleeve, something only visible to internal scanners. A younger employee passed by and caught sight of it. He froze for half a second, then kept walking. Even he knew what it meant. But he said nothing. Naomi tapped her tablet again. The digital seal on her boarding pass now pulsed amber, still active but pending verification. She took a slow breath and checked her schedule once more. The meeting with the CEO was still on. The audit file had already been transmitted to Geneva. This was just a travel inconvenience. This was data collection in real time. She wasn't there to be comfortable. She was there to see what the system did when no one knew they were being watched. And so far, they were failing. What they didn't know, what they hadn't even considered, was that the woman sitting silently by the window had the power to freeze every dollar of Atlantic sovereign's pending international expansion. Not tomorrow, not with a committee, right now. But she wouldn't announce it. Not yet. They would write their own report line by line with every biased glance and every block scan. And she would just keep watching. Because the truth was, Naomi Ellison didn't come here to fly. She came to decide if anyone else would. The lounge was quiet, but not peaceful. It buzzed with a kind of curated silence, the kind that smelled faintly of citrus, expensive leather, and controlled privilege. Everything inside gleamed with soft gold accents, polished surfaces, and carefully dimmed lighting. The music overhead wasn't music so much as atmosphere. A low jazz blend designed to flatter the egos of those who had earned their right to sit in that space. Naomi stepped in with her clearance verified and boarding pass still active. Escorted at last not because her credentials were accepted, but because someone behind the desk had decided it was easier to let her in than to keep explaining why she shouldn't be there. It was an accommodation, not an apology. She was shown to a low-backed chair near the far window, isolated, placed where no one would have to make eye contact unless they wanted to. She sat down, folded one leg neatly over the other, placed her carry-on beside her, and rested her tablet on her lap. From where she sat, she could see almost everything, and almost no one could see her. A server passed once, then twice. On the third round, he delivered chilled water to the man across from her, who hadn't even asked. Naomi raised her hand gently, just a single finger, a calm signal of readiness. The server looked at her for a moment, then veered left toward a couple at the bar. She didn't flinch. She made a note. 10:14 IEM, beverage service bypassed, third rotation, no inquiry made. Across the lounge, a tall woman in a pastel pantsuit leaned toward her friend and said, just loud enough to carry, "Looks like the cleaning staff gets to relax before shift change now." Her friend laughed into her espresso. Naomi paused, lowered her gaze to her tablet and typed, 1016, AEs. Verbal microaggression, subject L14, language coded but intentional, social hierarchy project. She didn't glance back, she didn't challenge. That wasn't her job today. She was here to witness. Another server passed again, offering bottled water to a couple seated beside a flickering fireplace screen. Naomi stood, walked quietly to the serving station, and asked in a soft, neutral voice, "May I have a glass of water, please?" The young man behind the counter looked up with the brittle courtesy of someone trying to stay polite through instinctual discomfort. Apologies, ma'am," he said, for prioritizing beverage service for platinum-tier guests while we reset. "Could I have your membership number?" Naomi blinked once. "No," she said, "but I do have diplomatic clearance and verified boarding through Atlantic Sovereign's Global Access Protocol. I'm not here on a points card." His eyebrows twitched slightly. He poured the water anyway. She nodded once in thanks, took the glass, and returned to her seat. She didn't drink it. The glass sat untouched beside her while she updated the log. Water service denied until prompted, membership request used as gatekeeping mechanism. Tier indicators assumed through appearance rather than verified credentials. The jazz in the background swelled slightly as another group entered. 3 men in sharp suits, laughing in French. The staff moved quickly for them, the energy in the room shifting toward welcome. Naomi remained still. Her tablet screen glowed faintly in the low light. She checked the time again. 45 minutes until her scheduled meeting. She hadn't been contacted. No staff member had approached to confirm her itinerary or verify her lounge permissions. The boarding pass still blinked amber. She knew what that meant. It meant she was technically approved but subject to override. Someone was holding the lever, deciding whether or not to pull it. It also meant her presence had triggered something unanticipated. A mismatch between appearance and expectation. It wasn't a bug, it was a filter. And she was watching it work in real time. Another woman passed her chair, glanced down and smiled tightly. "Nice to see the uniforms get a break," she said with a wink, then walked on. Naomi didn't react. She opened a new entry. Subject J21. Comment consistent with occupational misidentification. Pattern sustaining nearby, perhaps in his 40s, South Asian, well-dressed, looked up from his newspaper and gave Naomi a small sympathetic shrug, but he didn't speak. He didn't step in. That was the common rhythm, observation without interruption, witnessing but from a safe distance. She logged that too. 10 minutes passed, then 15. She received no drink refills, no check-ins, no acknowledgement from staff. Her boarding time approached. The glass wall across from her reflected the digital monitors overhead, weather patterns over Zurich, stock tickers, passenger updates. None of them included her name. None of them had ever been meant to. The theater of belonging designed not to welcome, but to filter. A young employee finally approached, clean-shaven, nerves radiating off him like heat. "Miss Ellison," he said, almost tripping over the name. "Sorry again for the delay. Sometimes our system flags these diplomatic codes if they're not routed through our main server. Just protocol, you understand?" Naomi studied his face for a moment, then replied, her voice low, clear, and smooth. "I specialize in recognizing patterns of access denial. That's why I'm here." The young man's eyes widened. He didn't respond. She didn't elaborate. She turned back to her tablet. A few minutes later, a staff member brought over a cup of tea and a plate of fresh fruit. No explanation, no apology. Naomi didn't touch either. She simply logged the delivery, its timing, and the sudden shift in behavior. From across the room, the woman in pastel looked up, her expression slightly different now, maybe confused, maybe unsettled. It was dawning on her that Naomi might not be who she thought. Or maybe it wasn't dawning at all. Maybe it didn't matter. A new message buzzed on Naomi's screen. It came from Geneva. All prior entries synced. Proceed to observation phase 2. Do not initiate correction. Let the structure finish building itself. Naomi looked up. The room looked no different than it had when she walked in. But now, every glance, every silence, every bypassed moment carried weight. It had been designed to feel invisible, but that was the illusion. Because in the end, the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. And Naomi was watching every line of its performance unfold. At exactly 10:38 a.m., a staff member returned to Naomi's seat in the lounge, this time accompanied by a woman in a fitted black blazer and an airport operations badge clipped firmly to her lapel. Her expression was professional but lacking warmth. "Ms. Ellison," she said, in a tone practiced to sound neutral, "I'm going to have to ask you to accompany us to the general waiting area. There's been a complication regarding your clearance. We'd like to resolve it away from this section." Naomi didn't blink. She simply closed her tablet, stood up, and straightened the crease in her blazer. "Of course," she said calmly. "Lead the way." The two staff members flanked her but didn't touch her. As she passed through the lounge, heads turned. Not because anyone knew who she was, but because in places like this, a woman being quietly escorted out always drew interest and assumptions. To those watching, it looked like she had wandered too far, sat in the wrong seat, dared to belong where she didn't. She was led down a hallway, through a private access door, and into the broader terminal. The silence of the lounge gave way to the cacophony of the regular world, rolling luggage, overhead announcements, the scent of industrial coffee, and food court pretzels. They brought her to a row of molded plastic chairs near a charging station humming faintly beside a vending machine. "We appreciate your patience," the woman said, then walked away with the staff member in tow, murmuring into a radio. Naomi sat, adjusted her bag, and waited. She didn't make a call. She didn't protest. Because this displacement, this quiet demotion from marble floors to linoleum tile, was part of the test. Her fingers moved across the tablet again. 10:44 a.m. Subject removed from lounge space under pretense of administrative error. No details disclosed. No formal challenge offered. Environment shifted from premium tier to general public waiting zone. Audit remains active. She looked around. Children cried. A mother poured cereal into a Ziploc bag for a toddler. No one noticed Naomi. No one cared, which was, in some ways, a kind of relief. The absence of attention stripped away performance. This was the part of the airport where people were simply people. But even here, systems operated, and some were watching closer than they realized. She opened her secure directory, selected a line labeled Finance Liaison Direct Channel, and tapped Call. 3 rings. A clear voice answered. Holdings Division, Internal Channel 7. Naomi didn't waste time. "Ellison, Clearance Class 5, Oversight Node F14. I suspect manual interference with diplomatic boarding authorization. 2 redirection attempts logged, system access delay ongoing." There was a pause, then a second voice, lower, older, more deliberate. "This is Deputy Director Shaw. Do you suspect manipulation of clearance status?" "Yes," Naomi replied. Flag appeared mid-access. No server crash, local override highly probable. Shaw exhaled sharply. "Understood. We'll pull access logs and begin trace immediately. Sit tight. Do not engage further with local personnel. Central will handle this." Naomi ended the call, set her device down on her lap, and folded her hands. Her breathing stayed even. She didn't lean back, she didn't fidget. A man sitting a few seats down glanced at her, looked away, then looked back. "Rough morning?" he asked casually. Naomi turned slightly toward him. "No," she said softly, "just informative." He chuckled awkwardly, uncertain how to respond. She didn't continue the conversation. 5 minutes later, a new staffer appeared, young, unsure, holding a tablet. "Ms. Ellison?" Naomi stood. "That's me." He cleared his throat. "We've re-verified your boarding details. Everything is good now. You can return to the lounge." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What changed?" The staffer hesitated, then said, "It was a system delay. Happens sometimes." She didn't argue, she simply nodded. "Then let's go." As she walked back through the terminal, people around her buzzed with normality. Boarding zones filled, suitcases rolled over tile. No one knew that a financial freeze just inches away from global deployment had nearly been triggered. Because someone didn't scan a pass, Naomi was calm but not silent. She was calculating. Every second had meaning. Every delay, every word, every choice made by those who assumed she was unimportant had been logged and timed. Not to go viral, not to punish individuals, but to identify the mechanism. Back in the lounge, she was escorted to a different seat, closer to the window, slightly more central. The server who had bypassed her earlier now approached with a glass of sparkling water, a napkin, and a forced smile. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" Naomi glanced at him briefly. "No, thank you." She logged the change in behavior, noted the time, the shift in eye contact, the sudden influx of performative attention across the room. The pastel-suited woman from earlier glanced up. Their eyes met. This time, Naomi didn't look away. Neither did the woman. The tension held for just long enough to sting, then broke as the woman turned and pretended to check her watch. Naomi's tablet vibrated once more. A notification from Geneva. Override confirmed, local clearance suspended without authorization. Flag access list. Elevate audit tier to phase 2. Pattern identified. Suppression protocol active. She tapped acknowledge and closed the alert. Everything was unfolding as expected. They had tried to move her out of sight with distance. What they didn't realize was that in moving her, they had eliminated plausible deniability. Every mistake from this point forward was no longer an error. It was deliberate. Naomi looked around the lounge, now aware of every crack in the facade, every smile that hid a bias, every system calibrated to protect comfort over integrity. She took a slow sip of her now refilled water and waited. Not for service, not for acknowledgement. She was waiting for the structure to collapse under the weight of its own performance, and she wouldn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. The lounge had returned to its curated rhythm. Muted jazz drifting overhead, glassware clinking softly, quiet conversations unfolding in the comfortable hush of people who were used to being served. Naomi sat motionless in the redesigned center of that stillness, her blouse smooth, her posture composed, her presence acknowledged now, but only because it had become too risky to ignore. She was halfway through reviewing an updated report from Geneva when it happened. Voice, chirpy and too bright, broke the air behind her. "Oh, I'm so sorry." Naomi turned just as the tray tilted. A steaming cup of coffee slipped, and in a slow-motion cascade, it splashed across her shoulder and down the front of her blouse. The heat seared for just a moment, but Naomi's expression didn't change. Her instinct wasn't to react, just to observe. The young flight attendant flushed, flustered. "Tight corners. I didn't see you. Oh my gosh, your shirt. At least it's not a Chanel, right?" She gave a breathless little laugh, as if that would smooth over the impact. Naomi looked down at the spreading stain, dark brown against crisp white linen, then slowly up at the woman. There was no anger on her face, no accusation, just a pause, a moment of clear calculation. She reached into her inner jacket pocket, pulled out a slim black card with silver trim, and handed it to the woman without a word. The attendant blinked, reading the top line aloud before she caught herself. "Internal Operations Incident Code." Her voice trailed off. She looked back at Naomi, suddenly uncertain. "It was just coffee," she whispered. Naomi's voice was calm and measured. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm documenting." She stood, gently peeled the soaked blazer from her shoulder, folded it once, and placed it on the table. A nearby staffer rushed forward, offering a paper bag and stammering apologies. Naomi took it without acknowledgement and walked toward the restroom. In the mirror, the damage looked worse than it felt. The blouse beneath was stained, the shoulder wrinkled and discolored. She removed it, rinsed the edge of the fabric, and dabbed the collar dry. Another attendant stood frozen near the sink, unsure whether to leave or help. Naomi ignored her, focused only on the task at hand. She changed into her backup blazer. When she returned to the main floor of the terminal, 2 security officers were waiting. One held a tablet, avoiding eye contact. "Ms. Ellison," he began, "we've received a flag regarding suspicious baggage behavior. We're going to need to do a quick check." Naomi stared at him, eyes unwavering. "Suspicious behavior," she repeated. "According to whom?" The man hesitated. "We're not permitted to disclose that, ma'am. It's just protocol." There it was again. Protocol. The polite mask for something much older. Naomi gave a single nod. "Of course, lead the way." They escorted her to a glass-walled room, clean, sterile, functional. Her bag was opened, every item inspected methodically. Tablet, charger, sealed blazer. No contraband, no issues. Everything was legal, intact, and innocuous. But that wasn't the point, and they both knew it. When they finished, the officer smiled weakly. "Thanks for your cooperation. You're all clear now." Naomi zipped the bag shut and looked him square in the face. "Of course I'm clear, but now you're not." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" Naomi tapped her watch. "Log entry uploaded, security bias event tagged, ATL terminal T5R. You'll see the report in a few minutes." She walked out before he could respond. Back in the main terminal, she returned to her lounge seat, the fresh blazer now sitting cleanly over the ruined blouse she refused to discard. The stain, though dry, was still visible, square across her chest, as if worn on purpose. And maybe it was. Around her people watched, some curious, some uneasy, some pretending not to stare at all. But Naomi didn't hide it. She didn't. She opened her tablet and checked her boarding pass one more time. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Name not found. Her record had been scrubbed. No error, no glitch. It had been removed. Manually. She refreshed the system twice. Still nothing. Her credentials were intact, her clearance live, but her flight access was gone. She checked the timestamp on the registry log. 7 minutes ago. She looked up. The staff at the front desk whispered in tight clusters. One pointed toward her, then looked away quickly. Naomi stood, walked to the counter, and addressed the nearest officer, Ms. Ellison. "Diplomatic tier clearance. My boarding pass was deactivated within the last 10 minutes. I'd like to know why." The officer, older, uniform sharp, tone polite, tapped the screen. "Your name isn't showing up in our system. We'll have to issue a manual override." Before he could continue, another man stepped forward. Younger, slick hair, expensive jacket, badge swinging from his neck. "There's no mistake," he said loudly. "She's not on the list. I checked it myself. She doesn't belong on that flight." Naomi turned to face him. The room went still. "I'm Mason Colburn, Director of Terminal Operations," he said, half addressing her, half performing for the room. "We've got state officials boarding soon. We don't need confusion." His smile was tight. "I don't know who approved her, but this isn't how things are done." Naomi didn't speak. Not yet. She reached into her bag, pulled out her card case, and slid a single matte black ID across the desk. The senior officer picked it up. His face blanched. He looked at the badge, then at her. Mason leaned over to see. Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was low, but it carried across the entire terminal. "You've just knowingly blocked a Level 5 audit agent from boarding a diplomatic flight. You've tampered with internal systems, misrepresented facts, and violated international compliance protocol. That's 3 violations, 2 of which carry suspension, 1 of which will cost you everything." No one moved. The silence was thicker than the coffee that had stained her blouse. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because power doesn't need volume, just proof. Mason Colburn stood frozen, his posture stiff with the dawning realization that he'd just made a career-altering mistake. The badge Naomi handed over glinted under the terminal lights, black, smooth, and edged in silver. It didn't just identify her as a traveler or even a diplomat. It marked her as something far more serious. An international compliance auditor, Class 5, operating under Protocol F-14. That level of clearance wasn't handed out. It was earned, reserved only for those trusted to move silently through the world's most powerful institutions and decide if they were fit to exist. Mason tried to recover, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "Look, I didn't know who you were," he said, louder than necessary, "but you have to understand how it look. There's a process, a system. Things slip." Naomi didn't move. "You didn't ask. You assumed." Her voice was low but sharp, every word cutting with precision. "And what you assumed was that I didn't belong here, not because of process, but because of presence." The staff at the counter had stopped whispering. Passengers nearby pretended to check their phones, but their ears were tuned like instruments. The senior officer, still holding her badge, cleared his throat awkwardly. Naomi took it back gently and slid it into her jacket pocket. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room had already adjusted its gravity around her. That was the moment Raymond Duval arrived. He didn't announce himself. There was no entourage, no fanfare. Just the sudden presence of someone used to walking into rooms and bending them to his will. Tall, silver-haired, his suit perfect, his steps quick and quiet. He came through the glass doors like a man who already knew something was broken and wanted to assess the damage before it got worse. His eyes found Naomi instantly. They didn't question. He walked straight toward her, with a face tight from internal calculation. "Ellison," he said, stopping exactly 3 feet in front of her. "We weren't informed of your arrival." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "That," she said, "was the point." Duval gave the faintest nod. "I've been briefed," he said, his voice low, measured. "The override on your boarding pass was unauthorized. The suppression of your audit access was not sanctioned." He looked around briefly, noting the stillness of the room, the faces pretending not to stare. Naomi said nothing. She let him continue. "We're launching an internal review," he added quickly. "This shouldn't have happened. It's unacceptable." Naomi met his gaze for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, just slightly, enough for her voice to lower and carry more weight. "This company," she said, "did not fail because a system glitched or because a name was mistyped. It failed the moment I walked through those glass doors and was seen not as a professional, but as a problem." Duval said nothing. She continued. "It failed when your staff looked at my credentials and still decided my face didn't match the file. It failed when I was passed over, redirected, dismissed, and humiliated not because of error, but because of expectation. Because here power still wears one look. And I didn't match." There was no anger in her voice, only truth, polished and irrefutable. "And now," she added, "every one of those decisions has been logged, correlated, reported." Duval's face was still, but his throat bobbed as he swallowed. Around them, the air had thickened with consequence. Naomi tapped her tablet and brought up a live file. She didn't need to show it. The action alone was enough. "I've submitted an initial enforcement recommendation to the International Oversight Council. The $12.4 billion funding allocation scheduled for your sustainability expansion is now under full review. Additionally, 3 of your upcoming capital projects will be frozen, pending ethics clearance. Your internal protocols have failed to meet minimum threshold standards for non-discriminatory access and operational neutrality." Duval inhaled slowly through his nose. "How much damage?" he asked quietly. Naomi didn't flinch. "Enough to follow your company for the next decade. Your ethics rating will be downgraded, your investor leverage will shrink, and every negotiation you enter will carry the shadow of this audit." Duval's jaw clenched, then loosened again. "What do you want?" he asked. Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Accountability. Structural change. Realignment of hiring, training, and leadership models. Immediate suspension of the personnel involved in access suppression, and written submission of your compliance recovery plan within 72 hours." Behind them, Mason Colburn tried to slink away, but Naomi turned and caught his movement. "Don't bother," she said coolly. "You'll be escorted out after this meeting. Your clearance has already been revoked." Mason's face drained of color. He didn't argue. He just nodded and sat down heavily, the weight of his collapse catching up to him all at once. Naomi turned back to Duval. "You don't need to apologize to me. I'm not your PR risk. I'm your mirror. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here to see how your people treat someone they don't recognize, someone who doesn't signal wealth but carries power anyway." And now that they've shown me exactly who they are, it's your turn to show me who you are. It's your turn to show me who you are." "Understood," he said. "I'll begin the corrections." Naomi gave him one final look, sharp, steady, and strangely merciful. "Begin them from the inside, or they'll collapse from the outside." And with that, she turned, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she walked back toward the lounge. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. Because once the truth is spoken in a room like that, it doesn't need to shout. It just waits for everyone to catch up. The room wasn't designed for panic. It was sleek, cold, and clinical, built for confident presentations and quiet power plays. But that morning, it held a different kind of energy. Naomi stood at the head of the brushed aluminum conference table, her hands lightly resting on either side of her open laptop, her presence calm but absolute. Around her, 8 senior executives from Atlantic Sovereign Airlines had taken their seats: legal, operations, finance, security, human resources, all freshly briefed, none of them fully prepared. Raymond Duvall stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaws set. The silence before she began was heavy. No one spoke, because they knew this wasn't a meeting. It was judgment. Naomi tapped a key and the wall behind her lit up with data. Names, times, behaviors, visual logs, and policy excerpts flowed in cascading columns. "This," she said evenly, "is the summarized result of a 4-hour field audit conducted under diplomatic access protocols. It includes time-stamped observations, staff conduct inconsistencies, and system override patterns captured in real time." She didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. She knew it by heart. The issue was not technical compliance. That phase passed weeks ago. This was behavioral, structural, cultural. A murmur stirred from one corner of the table, someone flipping too quickly through a printed briefing folder, trying to catch up. Naomi didn't pause. 15 employees across 5 departments, including 2 senior directors, demonstrated conduct that directly violates international ethics compliance. These are not isolated missteps. They form a pattern, one consistent with bias tolerance, procedural manipulation, and failure to uphold equitable access under protocol standards. Her voice remained steady. No anger, just clarity. "To be clear, these are not suggestions. These are recorded failures, and they carry consequences." She advanced the slide. A list of names appeared, color-coded by infraction severity. No one moved. Naomi continued, "I am submitting a preliminary enforcement directive recommending the suspension of Atlantic Sovereign's $12,400,000,000 0-cent sustainability loan pending full ethics remediation. Additionally, I'm issuing a project freeze on 3 major expansion initiatives: the Zurich terminal upgrade, the Lisbon cargo corridor, and the Frankfurt Elite transfer station. All were slated to break ground next quarter. All are now on hold." An audible exhale escaped from the legal counsel. He leaned toward the public relations officer and whispered something clipped and urgent. Naomi let it happen. She wanted them to feel it, the weight of accountability settling on their shoulders, not hers. HR Director Carter Hale spoke next, voice polished. "Tight. Mrs. Ellison, with respect, some of these behaviors might be considered minor lapses in professional decorum. I'm not sure they rise to the level of structural break." Naomi turned to him slowly, her expression flat. "Mr. Hale, when 15 individuals across multiple departments exhibit the same default response to someone who doesn't match their mental image of power, that is not a lapse. That is training. Or worse. Tolerance." Hale blinked but said nothing more. She clicked once more. "Per Article 12C of your conditional loan agreement, behavioral integrity is part of your funding eligibility. It's not an add-on, it's not branding, it's the foundation. 3 partner airlines failed this clause last year and lost all international subsidies. Your board signed the same contract, so did you." She looked around the table again. "You were warned." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was internal reckoning. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't offer comfort, she offered structure. Effective immediately, the following individuals will be suspended pending formal review. This includes Director Hale, He sinistrates you. You can't just because your own governance charter allows for external enforcement in cases where internal accountability has failed. Which, demonstrably it has. She let that sit before continuing. You may submit appeals, you may submit revised staffing models, but until then funding remains on hold and your public ethics rating will be downgraded on all global aviation registries. Your investors will receive copies of this report. Duval finally stepped forward. What happens next? He asked. Naomi looked at him. But what happens next is entirely up to you. You can resist, or you can rebuild, but this audit will stay. She closed her laptop with a soft click. Let me be clear. This is not retaliation. This is correction. This is what happens when a system becomes blind to the people it claims to serve. You failed not because of what you said, but because of what you chose not to see. And now, you're being asked to see. The projector dimmed. Naomi stood still for a moment, letting the quiet speak for itself. Then she turned and walked out of the room, not with triumph, but with the authority of someone who had done what needed to be done, and knew the hardest part wasn't the fallout. It was whether they would learn from it. The hum of the jet at 41,000 feet was barely audible, softened by the cabin's hush and the weight of everything left behind. Naomi Ellison sat in seat 1, clean, calm, exactly where she was meant to be. The same seat she had been blocked from, questioned for, erased from just hours before. Now no one dared challenge her. No one asked to scan her pass. Her boarding had been direct, smooth, unquestioned. But this time, it was more than a seat. It was a statement. Her navy blouse was crisp, her posture relaxed, but her eyes stayed focused, scanning the soft-lit cabin like a soldier after battle. Alert, composed, and unwilling to forget what the silence had caused. A folded envelope rested in her lap, ivory paper with no insignia. Just her name written in ink, carefully, intentionally. She had already read the contents, but still her fingers traced the edge of the flap as if the paper held something more than words. It was a letter from the man who had once publicly dismissed her. The man who laughed at her credentials, who revoked her boarding access, who thought her power was a bluff. Now his tone was different. There was no spin, no request for forgiveness, just acknowledgement, regret, a quiet plea to learn. I won't ask to be pardoned, I only ask for direction. If there's still a place where I can rebuild what I failed to see, tell me where to start. That was the line she remembered most. Naomi set the envelope aside, opened her tablet, and pulled up the draft proposal for a new initiative, one she had been developing quietly in the background for nearly a year. It had nothing to do with punishment. It wasn't about removing people. It was about reshaping them. Leadership reformation in underserved sectors. The pilot would begin in 3 African nations, field-based modules on ethics, dignity, equity, real training, real redemption. Not theory, not PR. She scribbled a few final notes, attached a reply, and uploaded the assignment into a secure portal. The man who once blocked her would now be sent to rebuild under supervision, not in shame, but in service. 'Cause Naomi didn't believe in burning systems to the ground. She believed in forcing them to grow into something better. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight crossed into European airspace. Outside the window, clouds shifted like slow-moving tectonics. Naomi closed her eyes, just for a moment. She didn't feel vindicated, she didn't feel victorious, she felt necessary. That was the difference between revenge and responsibility. Revenge wanted applause, responsibility wanted change. She reached into the side panel of her seat and retrieved a second file, one with fewer notes but heavier implications. It was the revised ethics charter she would be submitting to the Global Aviation Council. Stricter language, expanded enforcement, and a new clause mandating field empathy training for executives at all partner terminals. She had seen too much to settle for another apology. What she wanted was prevention. As the plane began its descent, Naomi looked once more at the stain on the edge of her backup blazer. Barely visible now, but not erased. She would never erase it. Not because it made her angry, but because it reminded her whose systems are built to overlook. Her fingers moved across the glass screen of her tablet, entering one final note into her report. This morning, I was treated like an error in your system, an anomaly, an inconvenience. But oversight does not always arrive in a limousine. Sometimes it walks in quietly, observes everything, and holds the pen that writes your future. The wheels touched down in Zurich. The captain's voice came on, smooth and distant. Naomi didn't rush to stand. She stayed seated, letting others move first, because she had nothing to prove. When she finally stepped off the aircraft and into the clean light of the terminal, a young man in a charcoal suit was waiting. "Mrs. Ellison," he said with a respectful nod, "the council is ready for your final summary." She walked beside him in silence, her stride steady. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something had shifted. And everyone who had doubted her, laughed at her, dismissed her, they wouldn't remember her title. They would remember her presence, because she hadn't destroyed them, she had taught them. And now they would carry that lesson forward, stamped into every corner of their operations. Not because she demanded it, but because she made them see what they never thought they had to. This is the seat they tried to deny me, the same seat where I wrote the policy that will reshape their future. She didn't need their permission to be here. She was the permission. To me, Naomi's story is more than a powerful narrative. It's a mirror. It forces us to ask where we've been complicit, where we've remained silent, and where we've mistaken professionalism for passivity. Some may say she went too far, others might feel she didn't go far enough. But the real question isn't about the punishment, it's about the potential. The story isn't about justice served, it's about justice designed, and the next chapter? That's up to us. Thank you for watching Justice Stories. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and help us shine light on the stories the world too often overlooks.